hello, and welcome to another episode of Talking with the Experts. This is the podcast where we chat with thought leaders about the challenges and opportunities involved in building resilience against today's growing natural hazard risks. And whatever it is, whether it's droughts and wildfires, storms or tornadoes, it's all on the table for this podcast. I'm going to get into today's episode here shortly. Before I do, though, I'm Mike Nichols, your host and AM's content and social media manager. And I'm really excited about today's episode. We're doing a few things differently this time that I think is really going to make for an extra special episode. First of all, I've never had a co-host for the program. Today I do. Brett Lane is joining me today as our special guest co-host. So Brett, there he is. How you doing,
Good morning,
Brett?
everybody. How you doing?
Good. It's good to see you. Good.
Yeah, happy
Having
to be
a good
here.
day?
I am. It sounds like it's going to be exciting.
I think so. You're out on the West Coast, right? So it's still early morning for you.
Yeah, still coffee time.
Yeah, there you go. Central time here, so we're right at lunchtime for us. So anyway, so with Brett, I don't know, some of you may already know him because we've got some Davis folks here, but for those of you who don't, he is our Director of Technical Support and Customer Experience today. He got his start with the company all the way back in 1994 when he joined the technical support team for our Davis brand. So Brett, I got to ask, do you have any idea why I invited you to be my co-host today?
I do not. I'm kind of wondering what you got me into.
Well, okay. Well, first of all, you bring a level of technical knowledge and expertise, especially about our Davis weather stations, that I just don't have. And I think there's a pretty decent chance that our conversation today might end up drifting into that area. And if it does, when we get beyond my depth, you're the guy who's going to bail me out. Sound good?
Absolutely. I'm ready. Yeah.
All right, I'm counting on you. And then there's also just the fact, you're an all-around great guy with your own unique energy. So gotta say, I'm just thrilled to have your energy on the show. Thank you.
And I just want to mention, since you mentioned I started in 1994, that I started when I was 6 years old. So
6. I thought it was
as old
5.
as that math.
I thought it was your kindergarten internship. So
yeah, that was it.
So Brett, I also did take a guess. Second reason why I am so excited about today's episode.
Because I am the biggest Twisters fan that you know.
That's what it is. That's exactly what it is. And because we are talking about a pretty cool, fun topic.
Sure.
But we've also got somebody pretty special to help talk about it, right? His name is Dr. Sean Waugh. And Sean, let's go ahead and get you to come out on screen with us.
Hey guys, how's it going?
There he is. How you doing, Sean?
I'm doing great. Hey, I'm going to challenge Brett on his biggest Twisters fan, claim.
Oh, no.
I think I have some room to fight back on that one a little bit.
I don't know. Sometimes you have to exclude the employees and the people who are closely tied to the project. So I don't know. We'll have to put that to the referee and see. But Sean served behind the scenes as a behind the scenes consultant for the movie. We're going to learn all about what that was like being on the movie set, some of the stories he picked up along the way. One of his main responsibilities was to guide the film crew on building out the iconic storm chaser vehicles that they used in the movie. In fact, this is a cool little tidbit. Sean is the reason we see Davis weather stations featured so prominently on the vehicles, and that was without any paid product placement. So we're a big fan of Sean here. So that said, though, our conversation will not be ending with the movie. That's our starting point. The reason they brought Sean on board in the first place is because he's actually a real life storm chaser. He's been a research scientist for NOAA's National Severe Storm Lab since 2016. And you can bet we're going to have some questions about his real life storm chasing experience and maybe how that compared to what we see in the movie. Right. So, Sean, thank you for being on. Really do appreciate it, buddy.
Absolutely, guys. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Now, before we dive into our conversation, though, I do need to tell all of you about the third and final reason I'm so excited about today's episode. This is going to be the very first episode we've ever recorded in front of an audience. And so what that means is all of you in the audience, you get a chance to pose your own questions to Sean. Instead of just listening to the conversation, you get to be part of it. So here's how that works. All the members of our audience have been placed in listen-only mode, but you still get to ask your questions as they come to you, and we want you to do that. Just use that questions button you see on the screen, type them into the questions box, and as we wrap up the main interview, we'll go ahead and get into a separate audience Q&A where we review and respond to your questions. Who knows, we may even sprinkle a few of those into the main interview as we get to it. So, and as if that's not enough, last little tidbit, everybody in our audience is also going to be getting the discount code for 10% off any purchase on davisinstruments.com. So we'll talk more about that later. So with that said, Sean, Brett, shall we go ahead and dive into the conversation?
Yeah, let's go.
Let's do it.
Outstanding. All right, so Sean, why don't we just go ahead and start off with how you ended up becoming a consultant on the Twisters movie? I mean, how's a regular person with no connections to Hollywood, I'm assuming, end up on the set of a Hollywood movie?
Yeah, I definitely don't have, any Hollywood actors that I just have on speed dial that I was just like, hey, I know you're working on this. Let me jump in here. So my involvement was actually largely accidental. I work here at NOAA's National Severe Storms Laboratory, which is located in Norman, Oklahoma. A really good friend of mine and a colleague, used to be my former boss by the name of Kevin Kelleher. He's one of the other tornado consultants on the movie. He was very involved in it from the beginning, working with Mark Smith on writing the original script and doing all of the iterations. He was actually involved in the original Twister movie way back 30 years ago. And I hadn't seen Kevin in like 5 years because he's retired and vacationing, enjoying life. And one day Kevin just showed up with 2 people, and I had no idea who these people were. But if he's giving a tour, they're important. And they were asking all of these crazy technical questions, taking a lot of pictures, really like invested and interested in some of the equipment and the vehicles that we had. And I later found out that it was the director of the movie, Lee Isaac Chung, and one of his, associate producers, Doug. They were basically doing research for what they wanted the visualization of the movie to feel like. And Isaac loved what he saw so much. He came back a few weeks later, brought the entire art department, the props team, the set deck team. All these people came in and they were like, hey, like, we really want to know like all these details about this. What does this do? What does that do? How big is this pipe? How long is that instrument? They were taking measurements of things. And by this point, obviously I knew what was going on. So I basically went on a limb. I looked dead at the Universal Studios, props department team. And I was like, hey guys, you're great at what you do. You guys are amazing professionals, but I do this for a living. If you want this equipment to look real and to be as authentic as possible, let me do it. Let me build it. I can make it better, faster, and more accurately than you guys can. And they were like, and I was like, I threw it out there and I was like, please don't be mad at me, and they were like, that's awesome. Love the idea. So yeah, we basically went forward with that. I gave them a parts list. They shipped everything to my house. It was a ton of fun to get involved. And my involvement just snowballed from there because they realized that I have a lot of knowledge and information on this to offer, and they tapped into that as much as they could.
That is so cool. That's really awesome. So you got to tell me, what was it like being a consultant on set? I mean, what's a day in the life of a movie consultant look like?
Yeah, so it was a lot of work, So they filmed entirely in Oklahoma. If you guys, didn't already know that, all of the scenes were filmed either on location in various places around, the state of Oklahoma or up on the soundstage in Oklahoma City. So depending on where they were, I would travel out to, either the filming location that they were at or just up to the studio. Their days start early. Most days that they're filming, they're going at like 6 a.m. They've got food trucks there and doing catering services, which some of the best breakfast I think I've ever had at these places. It was incredible, the amount of just opportunity and collaboration between all these different groups. But it would start very early. There were call sheets that go out that basically tell everyone involved. And I mean, not just the actors, but the other 400 or 500 people that are behind the scenes that you don't see, when they need to be there, what needs to happen, what scenes are being shot, what needs to be set up. I mean, it's itemized out on like a minute by minute schedule for the entire day. And some days, like especially on the sound stages, they'd have 2 or 3 different scenes filming at the same time, depending on like what sound stage you're on and things like that. So a lot of my involvement was sort of just hanging around during filming, making sure that I was available if the actors or the director had like a question about a line in the movie, does this feel right? Can we change this? I would regularly get phone calls or texts from like Glenn Powell or, Brandon Perea, like, because I have an actual job, right? So we'd be out chasing and I would get a text from Glenn. It's just like, hey, like we're filming this scene. Here's the context. This line doesn't feel right. What else do you have? So I'd like stop what I'm doing and be like, okay, here's 5 other options you could use. And to see some of that show up in the movie was a ton of fun. And that was just filming, right? Like that's not even counting all of the background work that took place to get it ready for filming, which is just an awesome experience. And there's a lot of like different teams that are working together, right, to create those scenes, and they film it in different ways. And like we actually have a clip that shows sort of that behind the scenes look of like driving the vehicles through like thunder and rain and how they create that on the soundstage to give that feel.
So is that what we're talking about right there?
Yeah, so this is it. So basically what you're seeing are those big like light panels that are just kind of flashing off to give that sort of feel and vibe of having lightning around the truck. And you can't see the truck because it's behind one of the curtains that they have set up there. But there's like a lot of rain audio and things like that that are playing, that they'll film this scene while filming the same scene, you know, externally out like on the road or things like that. And they tie all these different camera angles together to make it look authentic, right? So it's not all CGI that's doing some of those lighting effects. Because if you've got a close-in camera shot of, you know, Boone's face, for example, driving the vehicle, like you need that light to flash on his face. This is how they create those kinds of things.
Oh, that's crazy. Hey, Sean, take us through a couple of these shots that were from on set. Tell us what was going on here.
Yeah, so there's a couple of pictures up here. I'll kind of work from the left and then we'll go across to the right. So the left is obviously me repping the NOAA logo here, standing up on top of the car on set with one of the gas station scenes. There were 2 gas station scenes that we filmed. And I was able to actually bring to the set and bring into the film the actual research vehicles that we use here at NOAA's National Severe Storms Laboratory. You know, having the real authentic vehicles there adds credibility to it. So most of this filming day, I'm just kind of hanging out, taking it all in. It's very background related stuff. But watching the amount of effort they would go through to put up these big, like, boom carriers to like diffuse the light a little bit because it was too bright on the camera. When they would finish filming a scene, they would take this like disco ball looking thing and they would put it in front of the camera and they'd spin it around a bunch of different times in different spots of the camera. What they're doing is mapping the lighting conditions so that the VFX people can then take that and remove the background from it and put in the storm environments and the clouds and things that they want to have in there. The amount of detail that it goes in to create even a quarter-second scene is incredible. One in the middle there, that was an inside view of the gas station. And this was something else that I helped work with the group that does a lot of the graphics design, which we'll get into here in a little bit. But any screen, it's got to have something on it, right? So they had a TV up in the background. I gave them some personal chase footage to put up there that fit very well with the narrative of the movie. And it, you know, it worked because it involved like a wind turbine and a tornado. So it worked really, really well. So that's actually like my private chase footage, just kind of up there on the background. And then the right image is the first gas station scene. And what you might find interesting is the ground is wet, right? And it wasn't wet naturally. That was done intentionally. They would have an entire water tanker that between scenes would basically just water the ground because it helps with the reflection of the cameras and the lighting and everything. It makes the scene come alive a lot more. So they would do that intentionally to get certain effects on the film that they were using. And they were using real film, not digital. None of this was shot on a digital camera. It was all actual film. It was incredibly expensive, but it gives that feel and vibe that Isaac wanted to bring to life in the movie.
You know, you always hear that there's a lot of downtime making movies. Was that your experience? Is there a lot of gaps in action?
What's downtime? I have no idea what you're talking about. No, there's definitely some of that in the film, right? Because like they'll shoot a scene, they'll rewind. They'll shoot a scene, they'll rewind. We'll do this 20 or 30 times, right? And then they break, and then they got to set up for a different scene. They got to move the camera around. So there was a lot of shooting the same kind of moment, but from different camera angles. You know, one of the days that we were shooting on one of the gas station scenes, they actually rented a helicopter to put the camera on the helicopter to do aerial shots to get that kind of view that they wanted on things. So yeah, there's certainly some downtime. That's when a lot of the actors, the staff, that kind of thing, go to like the snack bar that's off to the side. It's got all the, you know, the good stuff that everybody wants to pull off of. You know, that's where all of the magic happens. It's at the snack bar between takes.
Oh, that's great. So as I understand it, you even got to appear in the film. Is that right?
I did, yeah. So part of a thank you for this, because I wasn't paid for any of this, right? Like all of this was completely free. I just did it because I wanted to be involved. It's an incredible opportunity. As a federal employee, I'm not allowed to be paid for any type of consulting work. So sort of as a thank you to that, they allowed me to show up in the movie. So I do appear in both of the gas station scenes. The back half of me is probably the most visible half. Yeah, there you go. I had people from high school reaching
They
out. They're like,
recognize
oh,
you?
we saw you in the movie, and I'm like, you haven't seen me for 20 years, but apparently you recognize the back of my head. So this is very fun. But no, it was an incredible feeling to like do all of this. It was 2 years worth of work, and then to go to the movie screen and see myself show up. It's a very surreal feeling. Like even though it was up there for like a quarter of a second, it was so much fun to be visible that way.
One of our attendees is asking, in one of the opening scenes of the movie, there are some storm chasers taking shelter from a tornado under an overpass, and they're asking, is that a good idea, or is that not?
Oh, please do not ever do that, right? The origin of that story actually started like 30 years ago. There was a TV crew in Kansas that took shelter underneath an overpass during a tornado, and they survived, but they got incredibly lucky. Underpasses act as a funnel. If you're taking shelter underneath an underpass and a tornado goes over, it focuses the wind down in a smaller space. So it actually increases the wind speed. You're exposed to all of the debris. You have no shelter. Yeah, please, please, please do not take shelter underneath an overpass. That is not where you want to be.
So
And
if
if
there's
you
one
watch the
takeaway from today, that's it
don't,
right there.
don't do that, right? And I mean, the movie shows that, right? Like that didn't end well for most of them trying to do that. So, yeah, definitely, that's a great question. Please do not shelter underneath an overpass.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. So now, as I understand it, Sean, one of your big responsibilities as a consultant was to guide the design of the storm chaser vehicles in the movie. So tell us a bit about what that process looked like, maybe what were some of the key decisions you had to help them walk through.
Yeah, so that was a lot of my involvement early on, right? Was making sure that the vehicles looked authentic because while the team at Universal, Kendra, Molly, all these people that are absolute legends in what it takes to bring films like this to life, working with the art department team, these guys have been doing research for like years, like trying to get all this stuff ready to, they had design boards and all kinds of stuff, but to have somebody come in that does this in the real world helps them significantly do their job because I can come in and be like, hey, this truck needs this many antennas and that many GoPros and this, weather station on top of it, right? And I've got a couple of pictures that kind of depict that. And there's a variety of vehicles that are in the film, one of which is the Storm Par vehicles, which are, Javi's team, that sort of the antagonist, if you want to say, for some of the movie at least. The props that are on top of the vehicles that look like the equipment racks, if you've seen any of the vehicles that we use
Bring
here,
that up for you.
yeah, if you see any of the vehicles like the one that I'm standing on right there, like it very much mimics that. I built that equipment in my garage at home. I literally gave them a parts order. A semi truck showed up like 5 days later and just dropped it. My neighbors had no idea what I was doing, but they were asking a lot of questions. So I built that equipment. I went to the warehouse where they were prepping the vehicles. I put it on the Storm Par truck. So like I actually physically built the props for all of the Storm Par vehicles. But then when you get into Tyler's team, Tyler's team in the movie doesn't have as much funding, right? So they needed something that was authentic and real, but not as high tech and gadgety. And when they were asking me questions, like the first thing that I was just thinking of was like, you know what? It's got to be a Davis station, right? Because that is the most iconic instrument that I see so many storm chasers using are different flavors of the Davis station. And there's some like back and forth about the vehicles, right? Like Tyler's truck has that Vantage Pro 2, which is the higher end model. It's a little more sophisticated, right? Because Tyler's got the research objectives. Whereas Lily's van down there in the bottom right corner, that's just got the Vantage View, and that's a more contained system. It's not as high end. Lily's not driving into tornadoes, so she doesn't need the higher end system, right? So there was a lot of thought that went into that to make all of those vehicles feel real and feel like they belonged in that environment.
Amazing.
Wow, that's amazing.
The white tubes in an upside down U shape. What are those? They look like there's a radiation shield on the bottom or something.
That's exactly right. Yeah, you hit it on the head. A lot of the research that we do here, in NOAA, like we're intentionally putting this equipment in places that, let's be honest, it's not meant to go. If we're buying off the shelf stuff, they are not designed to be repeatedly hit with softball hail. They're gonna break. So we have to design a lot of our equipment to withstand those impacts. So that upside down U that I tell everybody from the state of Texas kind of looks like an upside down Longhorn symbol, That's called the U-tube. That's something that I designed for my master's research. It's basically a radiation shield to keep those sensors protected, but make the observations that we need to make.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of
Nice.
sense.
Speaking of Texas, looking at that Doppler image down there, looks like they're in trouble. Is that real, or did you manufacture those for the movie? Or
Yeah, so any fans of the original movie may remember when Dorothy gets launched into the tornado for the first time in Twister back in 1996, there's a brief image of a radar that gets shown, right? It's a velocity. They're talking about the tornado shifting. Fun fact, that's completely wrong. It is clear air data. There is not a single storm on that radar image. So any meteorologist that watches it, like we just cringe every time we see it. And one of the biggest things that I wanted to make sure of is that we didn't make that mistake again. So all of the radar data that you see in this film, and I mean every single image, I hand selected. These are real cases from real events. That is all real radar data that I picked events that as closely mimic what was supposed to be happening in the environment as closely as I could. Now, obviously, we may move the data. That image that's there is actually the Dodge City, Kansas tornado outbreak from 2016. So that would have normally been in Kansas. We basically just shifted that radar data down. But all of that radar data and the warnings along with it are very real warnings that were issued by the actual like weather service offices in those regions. So that is very real data.
nice.
Very cool. Way to keep it authentic. That's amazing. So, and that actually raises a good question, Sean. So, as a real life storm chaser, I'm sure you had some strong opinions about how some of the scenes should play out, right? So, this being a perfect example. So, without giving away any spoilers, are there any scenes that in the movie that maybe got changed dramatically as a result of your input, like this? Or did any scenes maybe in the movie which you might have felt weren't quite right, could have been a little bit better?
Yeah, I tell everybody, at the end of the day, it's a Hollywood movie, right? It's meant to be a thrill-seeking, adrenaline-pumping action flick, right? It's got to make money. That's why they're doing it. So it's not going to be a documentary. And to be honest, I don't think anybody would watch a documentary about storm chasing because it's mostly boring, where you just drive around in the car. So they've been working on the script for 2 years before they even started filming, and that's where Kevin's role really came into this. So there were some elements of the story that were, we'll say, non-negotiable, right? I won't give it away too many spoilers in case people haven't watched, which if you haven't, please go watch it. It's out on DVD. You can go buy it or rent it now. But so there were some things that they couldn't change, like we'll say the main driving force of the characters in the movie and what they were trying to accomplish was not. But there were a lot of details along the way that were. And a good example of that, and this isn't spoiling anything because I guarantee you if you haven't watched it, you've seen the trailer. There's a certain sequence of the film where there are two tornadoes present at the same time. And reading through the script, I saw that, and there were some elements of the way that they'd written the script that I was like, okay, this doesn't, I get the feel, but like it doesn't really work this way in the real world. But you know what does? So I went to the director and I actually showed him real radar data cases. A good example of that is the Pilger, Nebraska event, which had two very large EF4 tornadoes that were kind of like simultaneously like existing in the same space and rotating around each other. I showed him the radar data, I showed him the pictures, and we talked about the fact that there's a term for this. It's called the Fujiwara effect. And he absolutely loved it. So much so that when they were filming that scene, I had a conversation with the character Dexter, who's played by Tunde. I was like, hey, like, this is what's going on. This is what it's called. And he loved it. And he injected that into the scene. So that line about like, there's a term for that. There's a term for that, Fujiwara effect when he gets really excited. That was not scripted originally. That was something that like I kind of added to the film. Glenn's character, when he's talking about like the striations and low precip, like that was some back and forth that we had about that to give some of those terms into the film to really give it that authenticity that was just super fun to watch play out.
Oh, that's awesome. That is amazing. Cool.
Another question from our attendees. I guess there's a seventh grade science class watching. That's exciting. And one of the students wants to know if the last tornado in the movie is based on the 2013 El Reno tornado.
That is an amazing question, and you've got a really good eye. You're certainly paying attention to history. So you are correct. The 2013 El Reno tornado, which for those that don't know, currently holds the record for the largest tornado in recorded human history. Officially, it's rated at 2.6 miles wide. A massive, massive tornado. It got rated an EF3 largely because it didn't hit anything because it was thankfully out in the middle of a field, but it had winds in excess of 300 miles an hour as measured by multiple Doppler radars that we have in the area. So very, very large, violent tornado. And that has, especially if you're in the Oklahoma area, is a pretty iconic moment in sort of our history. A lot of people reference that. And Isaac knew that when they were writing the film and creating this narrative. And that's why you see that tornado sort of impact that El Reno community, is sort of a callback to that event. And a lot of like its characteristics, its size, the violence that it entails is sort of an homage back to that event for sure.
Wow. Wow,
Great
that is
question.
amazing. Yeah, that's an excellent question. Now, shifting gears a little bit, building off you being a storm chaser, I've always wanted to know what draws someone into that field of work. I mean, how do you first get into storm chasing?
Yeah, listen, it's a lot of an adrenaline rush for sure. Like when you go storm chasing and you see Mother Nature's fury kind of come out in full force, like it is incredibly destructive, but it's also very inspiring and powerful to watch. You know, there's a lot about the atmosphere that we know, but there's so much that we don't. So when we go out and we do storm chasing, at least for me personally, it's a huge learning experience. Every time I start to think that I understand what the atmosphere is going to do, it finds a way to prove me wrong. So it's a really incredible opportunity to kind of learn about things that we read in textbooks or papers or research articles, things like that, and then apply that out in the real world. I got started really early on. I came to college. I knew I wanted to do meteorology. You know, it had been a passion of mine for years. It's my earliest memory actually was me telling my grandfather that I was going to become a meteorologist at like 4 years old. So it's been something that stuck with me for a while. When I got to college and my mom wasn't around to stop me anymore, I started storm chasing on my own. I went with a group of people and I learned how to do it properly, right? And that's the thing that I always encourage people, because it is so easy nowadays. You pull out your cell phone and you can almost just GPS map yourself to the nearest tornado warning. But it is really easy, if you don't know what you're doing, to get yourself into a situation that can cause problems. It's a lot like playing chess, right? You got to be thinking like 5, 6 moves out. If you're thinking one move at a time, you're going to get caught into a situation that's not going to end well. So like if that's something that you're passionate about and you want to do, please just go with somebody for a while before you try to go out on your own. Learn from somebody that's done it before, that's a professional at it, and it's going to teach you how to do it correctly.
Always wondered, if you were out there, can you tell that it's coming at you and you need to move, or do you have to look at online maps or something to detect that? How obvious is it that you're in danger?
Yeah, so that's part of that learning experience, right? Because like we're taking in all kinds of information. When I'm out chasing, I'm looking at radar data. I'm looking at the wind in the trees. I'm looking at observations on my phone. If I'm at one of my work vehicles, like I've got stuff on my truck that's telling me what the environment's doing. I'm looking at cloud formations. I'm looking at the movement. You know, there's sort of an old tale here that like if you're looking at a tornado and it's just getting bigger, it's not moving left or right, you're probably in trouble because it's heading at you, right? That's why it's getting bigger.
Oh,
It's because it's not deviating off, right? And I've certainly had my fair share of mistakes in the past. I'm not perfect. No one is. That's why I build in so many safety checks and I give myself time to adjust when the situation changes. So a lot of times, yeah, you can tell if you're paying attention, even without the radar data, even without anything else. Like if you're just watching the cloud motion and you understand the basics of how storm morphology works, how storm motion's working, how tornadoes can move around the sort of carousel of the mesocyclone, which is like the parent part that's actually doing the rotation, you can 100% tell where it's going to go. But then giving yourself room to adjust when you get caught off guard. Because there's a few, and we've got a video here in a little bit that is going to highlight that. That for the first part of that video, I'm like, no, we're fine. It's not coming at us. And then eventually I'm like, okay, no, it's actually coming at us. We should pay attention a little bit more. So
That's and that actually gets us into. I mean, Sean, I really want to hear what it. So we know how you got into storm chasing. What is it like being a storm chaser? Is it as adrenaline fueled as it looks like in the movies?
yeah, absolutely. So I think the next slide that you have queued up here is a good
All right.
segue into this. I'll talk while it's playing, but
Okay.
the act of storm chasing, it involves a lot, right? You're forecasting, you're taking in all of these different things. It's kind of like trying to guess what the future is going to be. You know, if anybody tries to argue that we don't know what we're doing, I ask anybody how your March Madness bracket worked out last year, and if anybody's got a perfect bracket, let me know. But you know, this example that's playing here, this is from Corning, Iowa, earlier this year. This was, if you may be more familiar with the event, this was the Greenfield, Iowa tornado day. This tornado was about a mile north of the Greenfield, Iowa tornado. And it's really rare. Obviously, at this point, I'm behind the tornado. It's moving away from us. It was very fast storm motion, so we weren't attempting to, you know, keep up with it. Like we basically planted in a position that we knew we were going to be okay. We let it go by. And this was our view afterwards. And, it's incredibly destructive, especially the Greenfield case caused a ton of just horrible things in Greenfield. But we can learn a lot by watching structures like this. I mean, you can see the motion in the cloud. You can see its connecting points to the ground. So when I watch things like this, like my brain is constantly running on like, how can we take this knowledge and turn it into something that we can then use to forecast these things better, to give more advanced warning, that sort of thing. So this was from Iowa earlier this year. This was a personal chase.
Oh, wow.
Literally hopped in a car with my friend and was like, let's go. We're going to Iowa. The day before this, we were in Colorado. It's just a ton of driving all over the plains trying to figure out where these things are going to happen.
Do you ever
Craziness.
jump off the road and drive through cornfields and reimburse the farmer when you do that or anything?
No, thankfully that doesn't happen. And please, if anybody's watching, please don't start doing any of that. You're going to make a lot of people mad. No, I actually spend a lot of time like intentionally staying on pavement. I know a lot of chasers will deviate off and they get out into the dirt. I don't personally like doing that. It's, four-wheel drive can get you in a lot of places. It can also get you really stuck. So when I go out on things like that, I try to stay on pavement. I can move faster. It's safer. I can get out of the way. I don't want to get buried into a road that I can't see or that I can't drive as fast as I need to. Like if a tornado's coming at me, I don't want to be doing 5 miles an hour because I'm fishtailing through some, muddy pond, that kind of thing. So that's just a personal choice from my perspective. But yeah, please don't anybody go driving through fields. You're going to make some farmers real mad.
So this next one we got, Sean, you were talking about Fujiwara effect. Is that what we're seeing here or no?
Yeah, so this film is the beginning of the Duke, Oklahoma, or El Dorado, Oklahoma, depending on what town you want to reference, tornado event from May earlier this year. There's actually a couple of different views that I've had of this tornado. We watched it for about 40 minutes. And the beginning aspect of this is sort of a multi-vortex, right? Where you have one large circulation that kind of breaks down into a bunch of smaller ones. We found that larger tornadoes aren't actually one big circulation. It's a bunch of little ones that are all rotating around a center point. So what we're seeing is the evidence of that multi-vortex structure as it sort of rotates around itself. You could make the argument that that's a Fujiwara effect just on a much smaller scale. We see storm systems do this. It happens occasionally with hurricanes. Tornadoes have a tendency to do this when you have like competing mesocyclones that are right next to each other. They can actually latch on and kind of rotate around each other. So it's really just a term that we use to describe when things are in close proximity, kind of rotating around each other, eating off their own rotation.
Very cool. Very interesting. And from this same tornado, I think we've got a later view, right? Is this it?
Maybe. So this is actually the Mound City, South Dakota day, which was in late August. Yeah, we had another view of it, but we may have shifted things around a little bit. So this event, which, amazing structure. This was a deployment that we went out onto with a hail camera vehicle that we're going to talk about sort of at the end of this. But this was obviously a hail-focused deployment, and then we ended up seeing like 5 tornadoes out of this thing. So that's just kind of how it goes sometimes. But it was incredible to watch this because the storm before this, like literally 10 minutes before this shot was taken, was just this nondescript, weak squall line. Like it just had no characterization. There was no severe threat. It was just rain. But when we hit the later evening and like afternoon and evening hours, we have what's called an enhancement of the low-level jet. It's basically a jet of wind that's right off the surface. And as that strengthens, as we get into those evening hours, because your surface layer starts to cool and that wind speed above it accelerates and increases, that can actually change the environment enough to produce significant severe weather events, which is exactly what happened here. So it's really incredible to watch the storm just evolve out of what was just a mess beforehand to this honestly beautiful structure. I don't think it even really hit anything. There's not a lot out in South Dakota, in that part of the state anyway, if you've ever been out there. But yeah, it was an incredible process to watch. Yeah, for sure.
One of our attendees is asking if the deaths of the veteran storm chasers, the Tim and Paul Samaras and Carl Young, did that change your approach? Did that change the way you storm chase?
Yeah, so I knew Tim. I'd met him several times. Tim was a legend in the community. He'd been doing research for years. He was a wind engineer, really wanting to understand what's going on inside a tornado and how we can turn that into building resilient structures, right? The work that Tim was doing, dropping probes in front of a tornado, has a level of risk associated with it that you kind of have to accept if you're doing that, right? Like you're intentionally setting yourself in the path and then trying to get out. My understanding of that event is they made some choices that put them on a path that didn't allow them to get out of the way fast enough. And he just happened to make those choices in front of the largest tornado in recorded human history. It was horrible what happened. It absolutely rocked the community, both on the chasing side, from hobby chasers and people that just sort of do it on their own personal time, as well as the research community. And I do think it changed how people look at this kind of stuff, right? Like, I think a lot of times as humans, we all have a tendency to think that we're better than the environment, right? That we know what's going on. That's not going to happen to me. I know what I'm doing. So for that to happen to somebody as good and professional as Tim was at it, really made people stop and think, like, okay, is this how I need to be approaching things? And I take the lessons from that into everything that I do now. That's why I'm always planning so many steps ahead, so that I don't put myself into a situation where I have no escape options, and then I'm just at the mercy of whatever Mother Nature's trying to throw at me.
Smart, smart. And speaking of escape options, let's go to this next video.
Yeah, so this is a great day. This was the Corral, Texas tornado, which honestly, when I went into the art department the first time for the movie, photo of this, because I posted this on my social media, was actually on the back wall as one of their like developmental photos that they were using for some of the scenes. Because this tornado, obviously, you'll see in the video, strengthens and intensifies, and it goes right over the wind turbine. And thankfully, it didn't damage the wind turbine at all. Like, it kept operating, versus the Greenfield, Iowa tornado that did hit a turbine and absolutely wrecked it. But what was fun about this was my wife and I went out chasing this day. This was a personal chase of ours. And, we saw the tornado. And when we were leaving that day, she was like, I've never really seen a tornado like up close. Like, I kind of want to see what they feel like up close, right? And I was like, okay, we can check that box. So this tornado ended up passing about 1/8 of a mile to our north. Now, initially in the video, like, we're zooming in and out, because like this was her video. She was a little excited, but the tornado initially is coming around the back end of that mesocyclone. So for a while, it is coming straight at us, and I'm looking at all kinds of different things. And obviously, we've got a lot of time built into this. So early on, I'm like, no, we're fine. It's going to go to the northeast, because I'm looking at the storm motion. And then eventually in the video, I'm like, oh, wait a minute. No, it's actually coming right at us. Oh, this is awesome. Like, it's coming right at us. So I got really excited about it. And again, because like it's out in the middle of nowhere, it's not hitting a town, it's not hitting a house. That's that challenging part of storm chasing, is balancing those emotions, because it can be really exciting, but it's also incredibly destructive. Even if it's not hitting a house, it's hitting a field. That's a farmer's livelihood that it's destroying. So it's a really complex, like, emotional state. But that tornado, like I said, it passed pretty close to us. It went like 1/8 of a mile to our north. So she got to check that box. I think it took her like a good 2 days to come down off that adrenaline high. That was
I can imagine.
It was a pretty wild day for sure.
So, as a research scientist for NOAA, right, storm chasing is a part of it, but I imagine you're doing a whole lot more than that, Sean. So, maybe if we could talk a little bit about what that broader role looks like.
Yeah, so my job at the National Severe Storms Laboratory is to design, and build a lot of the research equipment that we use when we go out into the field, right? Because like most of the instruments that we're trying to collect data off of either don't exist at all, or they kind of exist, but we need to modify it in some way because of the environment that we're trying to put it in. And a good example of that is some of the research vehicles that we use, the mobile mesonets, as we call them, that are essentially mobile weather stations. And I think you've got a picture of one of the ones that I've been working on recently,
Sure
which
do.
is called Hail Camera. So a lot of people probably on this call have experienced hail in some form or fashion. It's something that everybody can kind of identify with. The biggest hailstone, just for the record, that I've seen is probably about 6.5 inches in diameter. So, it's like the size of my face. Those are not something you want to be outside in. They come down at like 140 miles an hour. But the problem with hail is that right now all of our observations are post-impact, where it falls, and then you go outside later, you poke around in your yard to find the biggest one, take a selfie with it, you post it on Twitter, you tag the Weather Service, and that's your observation. We're missing so much information, right? That stone's melted, it's broken, it's not what fell 20 minutes ago, and that's what we need to know. We need to know how fast it's falling. Is it being deflected by the horizontal wind? Is there water on it while it's melting, right? This is all really important to how it looks on radar and how we can detect and warn for it. So the truck that you see there is a system that I've designed, which is called Hail Camera. It has 2 very high-speed cameras that shoot 4K footage at 330 frames a second. so that we can basically track and triangulate the position of those stones that fall in the truck and figure out their size, their shape, their velocity. We can see water drops pulling off of the top of the stone as it comes through.
That's some serious technology.
Yeah, it's a ton of fun. But the trick here is that we need it to show up in the image, right? So we need a lot of light to do that because those frames are only exposed for about 50 microseconds. So the image that you see there, if you look closely, you can see 8 individual LEDs. Those are all 200-watt LEDs that each produce 32,000 lumens of light per LED. So there's 8 of them. That's 256,000 lumens. To put that in perspective, the sun only puts out about 170,000 lumens in the same area. So this is actually brighter than the sun. You need eclipse glasses to look at the back of this truck. I cannot turn it on if there's anybody within like a quarter mile of me because I'll just like burn retinas out. Very, very high powered system. It's something that we're really excited to get out into the field and really get its hands dirty.
You get to play with all the good toys.
So do storm chasers like to play chess in their downtime? What is that I see in the back of the truck?
Yeah, so we got to do something in our downtime when we're waiting for storms to fire, right? But no, with the camera-based system, one of the tricks to this is we need a distortionless image. So that checkerboard pattern is actually a really easy way to map out the lens distortion so that we can correct those images, get a nice flat plane. That makes it easier to identify the true size of the object. But good eye picking that up in there.
Nice, interesting. All right, Sean. So while we're talking about NOAA, I think it's kind of worth noting your administration, it includes the National Weather Service and its Citizen Weather Observing Program. Our audience, we've got a fair number of Davis Weather Station users who could be potential participants in that program. You want to say anything about that?
Yeah, so the Citizen Weather Observing Program is actually a really nice program, right? Because one of the things that we've really started to embrace and explore in our agency's work is bringing in what we call citizen science, where basically the general public can help provide ways. The Citizen Weather Observing Program is an example of that. MPing, like the letter I and then ping, you can download that on the App Store, Google, Android, iPhone, whatever. That's another good example where you can actually report precip types. But if you've got a weather station at home and you're like, hey, I like this data, but I wonder if anybody else would want to use it, the answer is yes. So the Citizen Weather Observing Program is a way where you can basically sign up, you can connect your device to it, you can stream that data in, and it melds all of this together. And a lot of the different forecast offices around the country use that information to forecast on days because it provides more detail and more observations than they have in like the sort of like state-funded networks, depending on what it is that they have access to. So it's a really great way to use the information that you're already collecting anyway to kind of help the greater good, to provide that picture for everybody else. It's completely free, and if you have any interest in doing it, just search Citizen Weather Observing Program and you'll find what you're looking for.
Perfect. Thank you, Sean. And while we're talking about NOAA, I understand both you and NOAA are going to be at the upcoming annual meeting of the American Meteorological Society, which is in New Orleans from January 12th to the 16th.
Yeah.
And tell us about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So AMS holds meetings. We have a lot of different conferences and things like that. But when we do research like this, like one of our big challenges is to try to take that information and disseminate it out, not only to other researchers in the field, but the general public as well, right? Because that's our goal, is to use this information to increase that warning process. And we can only do that by talking about it and sharing our findings. So AMS holds an annual meeting every year. This year it's in New Orleans, like you said. Next year I think it's in Houston. It moves around a little bit, but it's a really incredible opportunity for a lot of researchers in the field of meteorology all over the world to come here and talk about their science, talk about what they're doing, learn from other people, combine efforts, and really advance that warning process forward so that we can make better, more accurate, longer lead times, longer warnings, decrease that false alarm ratio, that sort of thing. That's the ultimate goal with all this. So if anybody's in New Orleans, in like mid-ish January, I can't remember the exact dates. I think it's like the second or third week of January. Come by, stop by, check out some of the newest research. There's an exhibit hall space that's got a ton of neat stuff. You guys are going to be there. We're going to have the NOAA booth there as well. There's a lot of fun toys and conversations to be had. So definitely stop by if anybody's in the area.
Do I hear there might be a little bit more on the movie at the show? Is that right?
Yeah, so we're actually going to have 2 different sessions at AMS. There's a student conference that's held immediately before, like over the weekend, We're going to have a session during that and a session on Monday during the main conference where we actually talk about twisters. We talk about some of the behind the scenes stuff, some of the science behind it, what's real, what's not real, okay, that's fudging it a little bit, that kind of thing. And really dig into the science of the movie and what it took to make it. Because this movie has the potential to create an entire generation of people interested in meteorology. When the original movie came out 30 years ago, enrollment at undergraduate degree programs across the country doubled for like the next 20 years because people were so fascinated by that movie that it had completely changed their career path and they got into meteorology because of that. So we want to have that conversation with this movie as well.
Oh, wow. Wow, that's great. While we're talking about AMS, the team from AM, we're going to be there too. For anybody who might want to stop by and see us, we'll be at booth 231. And also, Sean, I would invite you to come out. We've got probably about half a dozen speakers sharing some pretty interesting cutting edge research on lightning and lightning behavior. So about a half a dozen presentations on that, different facets of lightning behavior.
Yeah, I'll be there for sure.
Excellent. And with that, we do need to make sure, just leave it. I know Brett's done a great job incorporating some of the audience questions as we go along, but we do want to leave a little time to get to some of those questions. So should we go ahead and dive into our audience Q&A?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
Brett, you got any more for us?
Yeah, there's a couple questions left. A couple around the vehicles in the movie. I'll just read both of them. How realistic was Glenn Powell's truck? Mainly the drill down anchor system. Is that sort of a system that's actually used in the field? And is the Dorothy type weather equipment feasible in real life?
Great questions. Yeah. So we'll start with the vehicles first, and then we'll go to the Dorothy thing. So there are a couple of vehicles that do have not the corkscrew spikes, but they have sort of pneumatically driven spikes as well. If you watch social media, YouTube, if you watch the old Discovery show Storm Chasers, you'll see some examples of that. We don't do that at the National Severe Storms Laboratory. It's not our goal or objective to drive into tornadoes. To be honest, these tornadoes are incredibly complex structures. Even driving a single vehicle into something like that, it's not going to tell us enough information about how it's actually working to really understand that environment. So we work better with remote sensing instruments that we can kind of observe things from the outside. But yes, Glenn's truck is based off of some real vehicles that do drive into tornadoes. Again, don't recommend doing this at home. Please don't try that. These vehicles are armored. They can take the winds, that kind of thing. And the spikes are basically meant to pull the truck down, keep it anchored to the surface, and stop that sort of tipping motion that happens when you get into those higher wind speeds. The challenge with that is that no matter how much armor you have on there, if you get hit with debris, that's where problems start to happen, right? Like if the tornado throws a tree at you at 150 miles an hour, I don't know if the spikes are going to help. So that's the challenge with doing that kind of stuff, that the people that do that kind of work, that drive into those tornadoes and capture that footage, are very careful with. Like, they know what they're doing, and they're very careful about how they approach those types of events so that they're not putting themselves in an area where they're going to get hit with that debris. So yes, based on the real world, not the corkscrews, just sort of like pneumatic spikes that just kind of go at an angle. The second question, Dorothy. So fun fact, the original movie with Dorothy was loosely based off of some real science that was done at NSSL in the 80s called TOTO. Totable Observing Tornado something or other. I can't remember what it stands for. But basically, it was like a 300-pound canister that was painted bright orange. It's got a bunch of instruments on it. And it was essentially an early tornado probe. The idea was to place it in front of tornadoes, try to let the tornado run over it, and then take those observations to try to understand. Because we had no idea what was going on inside tornadoes. And it turns out it's a lot harder to get things hit intentionally with a tornado than you might think. At least while maintaining some sort of safety margin, without like driving like right in front of it. So they only did it for a couple of years, and then they scrapped the program because it wasn't really providing the data that we thought it was going to, and we decided to go a different direction with that. But there is sort of this idea of like, would it work, right? If you could create a whole bunch of tiny little observing platforms and launch them into a tornado and spread them around all over the place and get those instantaneous observations, would it actually inform us? And the answer is yes. There are some people that are working on that. We've got some concepts that we've been kind of playing around with here for a couple of years that we're going to be trying, things like that, some new technologies that we're working on. So there's still some realism that's kind of based in that. There's some C.S. Lewis has some good examples of this, of science fiction deriving reality, that sort of thing. So yeah, give it a couple of years and let's see where it goes.
Crazy.
Nice. Another movie question. How much did the actual weather play a role in the film? Were certain scenes filmed during actual storms?
Yeah, so they actually had to call off shooting multiple times because it turns
Really?
out that filming a movie in Oklahoma outside in May is probably a bad idea if you're trying to avoid severe weather. There were a lot of questions early on about whether they were going to try to do it like live, chasing tornadoes live. That's like impossible to get the shots that you're after. There's a whole lot of safety that's concerned with that. So basically they would stop production anytime there was lightning in the area. If there were tornado watches, they would shut down production for the day, that sort of thing. They did, however, ingest some actual footage. They hired Sean Casey, who was on the Discovery show Storm Chasers years ago. Dr. Jana Hauser at The Ohio State University. She and Sean basically went out chasing. They got some actual amazing footage, from tornadoes and storms and hail and all kinds of stuff that they used as sort of like a jump start for the special effects to create those environments. But yeah, they didn't film anything with like a live tornado in the background. That's Universal
Not
Studios
quite
doesn't
that
like
far.
that kind of liability.
Yeah, insurance. So moving on to some more, kind of technical weather questions. Somebody asked do you notice that there's a delay between NEXRAD radar data that you're looking at on your phone and what you see in real life, right? Is there a delay in there?
Yes, absolutely. And that's something like, when I talk about like storm chasing and knowing what's going on and paying attention to all the variables, that's a really, really critical part, right? Because that radar is doing, a base scan and then it goes up in elevation and it does another scan and then it goes up. You've got minutes between those updates. By the time you see that radar data come into your phone, it's at least 5 to 6 minutes old. And that's if you've got an active connection, right? Like maybe sometimes your internet drops out and you haven't gotten an update in 10 minutes.
Mhm.
If you're not paying attention to like, hey, like that radar image is 30 minutes old, you may think you're acting off current information, but you're not. And even if it is current information, it's still old, right? Looking at radar data and just staring at your phone and not paying attention to what's going on outside is a really easy way to get yourself in trouble. So I use radar data as like an accessory to my decision making. It's not my core. I use what I know about meteorology, what I know about storm structure, tornado behavior, all that kind of thing when I'm chasing. And the visual aspects of what I'm seeing with my eyes, that's what I trust most. Then I trust the data that I'm collecting on my car. Then I trust the radar, right? Because that's downstream. It's sort of a ancillary information rather than my core decision making thing.
And kind of related to that, a question of when the radar is in VCP 212 mode, do those updates make it quicker than a full volume scan? That was
Yeah, so
almost three.
the Weather Service has a bunch of different what they call scan strategies, right? Like there's VCP 32 and 212, there's clear air, there's precip, there's all these different scan strategies that they use. And essentially what that means is it's the pattern that the radar does, right? Maybe one pattern might be where it does like your half degree tilt and then it goes up to 1 degree and it does that one and then 1.5 and it does that one. And it steps all the way through, but that's a lot of delay by the time it goes all the way up and then comes all the way back down to that base level scan. A different strategy like BCP 12 might throw in some of those low level scans in the middle where maybe you do your base layer, you go up a tilt, then you go back down and you do the base layer again, right? Because that's the part that like most people are paying attention to because it's closest to the surface. So depending on those scan strategies that are being used, it can accelerate when you get that data. Instead of waiting 5 or 6 minutes, it might be 3 minutes, but it's still delayed, right? Like that data still has to be collected. It has to be processed. Then it has to be pushed out. Like there are a lot of links in that chain. So by the time you get it, even with a fast like VCP scanning strategy, that sort of thing, it's still very delayed.
Interesting. And keeping with the tornado questions, can you explain the inflow off a tornado?
Yeah, so like the tornado itself, right? It's this big, rotating column of air, and it's drawing in air from all around it. It's a low pressure at its center, and that air's got to go somewhere, so it's got to go up. But you don't create like a vacuum, it's not like literally like just digging a hole into the ground. Some tornadoes I've seen pull up, 6 inches of soil when they do it. So some of them start to push that line. But that air that's coming in is basically corkscrewing in from all different angles. And that's that inflow air. And a really challenging aspect of this, especially when you're doing damage surveys, is sometimes the inflow to the tornado, if the tornado is particularly strong, that inflow can also be damaging and destructive. The El Reno tornado in 2013 that got brought up, there's a reason I say officially was rated at 2.6 miles, because that's when they can clearly say this was the tornado. Unofficially, it was probably bigger than that, but it became very difficult to tell the difference between the tornado level damage and the inflow winds causing damage, because the inflow to that tornado was over 100 miles an hour. So you have like extremely strong straight line winds that are just getting sucked into this giant tornado that are also causing destruction. So yeah, the inflow winds can get pretty intense on tornadoes, and that accelerates as you get closer to the vortex and you start to accelerate into that low pressure center, and then things kind of pull upward away from the surface.
With all the new technology, do you think that we'll get to a point where we can predict tornadoes? You think that'll become a reality?
Yeah, that's one of the biggest things that we've been working on in the last like 5, 10, 15 years, right? We've done studies, big programs, Vortex, Vortex 2, Perils, all these big research projects to try to better understand tornadoes. We've gotten really good from a like meteorological perspective about picking out days that are just in a large sense supportive of those environments, right? Hey, this environment is very likely to produce storms that are going to produce tornadoes. What we don't know is why two storms in the same environment behave differently, right? That storm's got a tornado that's been on the ground for 2 hours and is 2 miles wide. That storm is 20 miles away and it can't produce a tornado, where it's only producing like intermittent, 10-yard wide, 30-second long tornadoes. Like, what's causing those storms to react differently, even though they're in the same environment, right? How do we factor in that knowledge to increase our warning lead time, but decrease our false alarm ratio so that we're not unnecessarily warning people? And that's a lot of the research that we're focusing on now. How do environments tap in to, how do storms, tap into the environment to produce that kind of rotation? Why is one storm able to do it and others not? Like, that's a question that we don't have an answer to. And that's why we keep going out into the field and trying to collect those observations, because we're trying to figure that answer out.
I think that's so critical, though, what you bring up, Sean. It's just as important to avoid the false alarms as it is to give the early warnings, because false alarms mean those early warnings aren't being taken seriously, right? So, and they have to be taken seriously to do any good. That's such an incredibly important point you touched on, so I had to draw that out.
There's some research that's going on here at the lab. We're using programs like Waugh. It's called Warn on Forecast System, where basically we're incorporating a lot of our new understanding and technologies, and we're creating products that use AI and machine learning techniques to essentially forecast out on rapid update cycles how a storm is going to evolve in the future, which ones are going to produce tornadoes, that sort of thing. And what we're finding is that we're actually starting to really increase our skill in predicting in the near future, hey, this storm is likely to produce a tornado. This one is likely to produce a long track storm, things like that. So we're starting to see some skill in differentiating those environments, because we're incorporating the knowledge and the understanding that we're gaining through doing this research. And ultimately, the idea, is to try to produce a warning that people can get, 30 minutes or 45 minutes or an hour. But then we get into some other problems, right? Like, from a social science perspective, what do people do with that information? There's a whole branch of meteorology where people are just looking at psychology of how people react and receive warning information. What do you do with that kind of time, right? Like, if we give you 45 minutes before a tornado is going to hit, do you actually act on it, or do you just say, I got time to finish this Xbox game that I'm playing, and I'll worry about it 20 minutes from now, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of interesting social behavior that researchers, brilliant scientists are starting to pick at now.
It's amazing. So we are at the top of the hour. Brett, I'd say if you've want to pick one question to be our last one for the day, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, for sure. Let's go back to the classroom. This is a fun question. A student wants to know what your favorite tornado that you've seen is, and why is it your favorite?
That's such a hard question. I've seen so many tornadoes. Oh man. That's so tough. I think if I had to pick one, I'm going to get really sappy here for a minute. Probably the Texas tornado that we showed the video of. And the reason why is because that's something that I did, personally, just watching that forecast evolve, that was a particularly hard day to chase, right? Like picking the target area was really far away. But because I was able to do that with my wife, with somebody that enjoys doing that with me, we had our dogs in the back seat who, for the record, don't care apparently at all about tornadoes. They were just like, what's going on? You know, like watching the tornado. I had not a care in the world. But, you know, to be able to share that kind of passion about something that you enjoy so much with somebody that's so close to you, it means a lot to me. So to have that moment with somebody that I care so deeply about, I think is really like that signifies that to me as being one of my most memorable ones. I could keep going down the list, you know.
That's a great answer, though. That's a great answer.
That's great.
All right, so that's about it for our time today. So Sean, Brett, both of you, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedules. I really
Absolutely.
do.
And thank you, Sean.
Hey, anytime, guys. Happy to have this kind of conversation. Thanks for having me on.
No, it was absolutely brilliant. Loved it. And personally, I found today's discussion to be both entertaining and eye-opening. I hope all of you did too. You still have any questions, or if you asked a question that maybe didn't get answered, because we did get a lot of questions during today, feel free, send those our way at info@aem.eco, and we'll either get it out to someone on our end to answer, or maybe we'll be able to connect you with Sean. We'll figure that out, but feel free to send those questions over to us. And then after our session is over, watch for an email to come your way. That's going to include a link to the recording of today's podcast episode. And along with that, you're going to get your code and instructions on how to use your 10% discount on davisinstruments.com. So until next time, this is Mike Nichols for AEM and for Talking with the Experts.